I'd love to ask is, what is Locofy AI and what's its mission?
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me, Elim. Yeah, so Locofy is basically think of it as a developer tool that helps developers or builders basically. It initially was kept, it was built keeping designers and developers in mind, but we realized as we were building it that it's not just designers and developers, it's anyone who wants to build products, whether it's a website, web app, mobile app. So it basically helps builders accelerate and build products faster. And it is essentially built on my co-founder and my experience building products for the last 10 to 15 years, where we started realizing just how difficult it is for most companies or for individuals and startups to find really good engineers. And I got lucky. I got a really good engineer who's now my co-founder, but not many companies have that luxury. So we decided to build a developer tool that can help make development easier, accessible, and faster. It still targets people who are designers and developers, so it's not a no-code tool. But yeah, essentially it uses AI to convert designs into code. That code would have been written by engineers over weeks or months or sometimes even quarters. We bring it down to a click with some minor edits here and there. And the idea is to take this to a point where we're not just converting designs to code, but helping people go from idea to launch to iterations faster without necessarily having hundreds of engineers or requiring millions of dollars in capital.
And how do you think like founders and builders themselves should incorporate low-code software like Locofy into their workflow? And where do you see the future at?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've now been doing this for 3 years. Our product has been out in free beta where people can try it out. By the way, you can try it out for free as well. How people use it in their workflow has changed quite a bit. And there's been a couple of forces at play. One, the product itself has matured, or at least has gotten to a point where we've gone through, I would say, 100+ iterations in the last 2.5 years, and gotten to a stage where not just startups and individuals, but enterprises are starting to also use Locofy, at the point of handoff, where designers finish designs and hand it over to the engineers, and then engineers start like importing assets, writing code from scratch, writing code for something that kind of already is running on the web for them. Why generate code again from scratch? And I think startups obviously understood that from a pain point, but engineers in enterprises are starting to realize that now as well. I think the other forces at play is obviously when we started the company in 2021, AI was not what it is today, right? Like AI is still AI, but whether you call it a hype cycle or it is almost impossible to neglect what AI can do for us, especially when it comes to builders. And in the early days, we were seeing some friction from enterprises, especially because they have a larger team of developers and they can do the work that we are doing, and they sometimes see it as a bit of a threat, or they're not incentivized to move fast, or it's not an individual's decision, it's a group's decision, versus a startup where you're one or two engineers and you just have to move fast. Anyone who's built a startup knows that early stages you have almost always gotten tight deadlines which seem impossible, and you have 2 or 3 developers at max, and if you're lucky, one of them is really good, right? So for startups, it was a very, very clear value proposition from day one. Startups, individuals, freelancers, students, it was a clear value proposition for them from day one, and they use it when they are building new products from scratch. So that's how it fits in the workflow, right? And it massively accelerates them. But for enterprises that are not necessarily building new features from scratch or new apps or new designs from scratch, we have iterated a lot with them and gotten to a point where now they can connect their existing design systems and existing code and can iterate and make Locofy the source of front end rather than just a design to code generation tool. So imagine you're working in a big company and you're building a new feature or iterating on a feature. Some parts of it are new designs, some part of it is using components you've built in the past, and you've already coded them, and you don't want Locofy to generate code from scratch, but rather reuse it from your own component library. Now we allow them to do that. So when it comes to enterprises, it fits more into not just building new products, but prototyping. Product managers in enterprises are now able to go into the design tool and really bring their idea to life to at least get alignment and then get their projects prioritized. Whether it's landing pages, whether it's iterating on a feature which is very UI heavy, Locofy now fits into that as well. So it has evolved over the past 2 to 3 years since we started.
So there's a different usage for low-code tools depending on the scale of your company. And you mentioned like early stage startups, like you have to build things fast. I saw that you were the CPO and a large part of the products of great companies such as Wego, Homage, and Finaccel, which I saw was recently a unicorn, and you were part of their growth in early stages. What would you say are like insights you learn about product building that you regularly incorporate into your current startup, Locofy?
Yeah, I think the one lesson that never goes wrong is choosing the right problems. And I think that's something where I had a long journey, because I've been building before I became chief product officer at these three startups. I started building my first taxi sharing app 2010, if I'm not wrong.
Right after college, right? If I'm correct.
Right around college, yes. So in college, I was building a Friendster, no, sorry, not Friendster, like a friends near me app while I was interning at Microsoft. It was basically similar to Foursquare. Then I did a taxi sharing app. Then I did a sports platform. You could argue I was onto something because the taxi sharing before Uber existed. Of course, Uber is not just taxi sharing; it's taxi hailing. But I did taxi sharing before Ubers and the Olas and the Grabs of this region. I thought I was onto something, but maybe I was choosing the wrong problem at the wrong time. And one thing I realized quite early was whether I was choosing the right problem or not, I was able to solve them. They may not have been impactful problems, but I was able to build with limited resources, right? Like I had a full-time job in Credit Suisse, which honestly was one of the most boring times of my life, but that gave me the space in the evenings and weekends to actually do something more exciting and to build products. And that's where I started realizing that I can build, whether it's writing code myself or writing the infrastructure document myself, whether it's doing the designs on a piece of paper. And even in the early days, I would do designs myself as well. So I realized that I could build a product and I can get people excited on a problem and also raise some money as well, or find a way to get it running bootstrapped. And the more I did that and the more I failed, the more I realized it came down to the problem itself. It was very rarely that I built the wrong solution. It was more that I chose a problem that was more a hobby for me, or it was coming from a place of necessity for myself. So as a graduate, I was like, I'm not going to take a train in the morning. So I would just take a taxi and realize I was spending 20% of my salary on taxis. And then I found people in my company who were living in the same area and they were as lazy as me. And we started sharing a taxi. That's what drove me to build a taxi sharing app. Another one was sports platform. I'm a huge sports fan. I've traveled for World Cup crickets and footballs around the world. And I would go and watch, matches at bars. And I thought, hey, it must be a problem. I built an app for it. So I think I've gone from that 12, 13 years ago to then working at Wego, where I started, I think, really understanding that product management is something that I am damn good at. And I can work with really good engineers, even if it's a small team, and build great products. So we built Asia's first editor's choice app, the world's fastest progressive web app, without any experience in web. And I realized that the thing that became more and more clear was I'm good at building products and learning new technologies and moving fast with a small team and pretty much like building the gold standard. But while working at Wego, I would say is when I started realizing that my ambition kept growing, and what I wanted to do with it, with that ambition of building great products, was also to choose the right problem. And that's where I both went for choosing the right problem, but also an earlier stage problem, because I realized I'm an impact player. If you're an impact player, you just know it. I knew I can help a company grow from a 10 million to a billion, rather than join a $1 billion company and maybe grow it to 10 billion. I'm more of a 0 to 1 to kind of like 10 kind of a guy than a 10 to 100 kind of a guy. And I was like, if I'm going to help a company go from nothing to something, I will have a bigger piece of the pie. So I was always the guy who was like, hey, I will rather go for value creation, capturing a part of the value creation, capturing a part of the equity, giving up on my salary, and really like choosing the right problem. Because if you can then build $1 billion company and you own a 1%, it pays off for pretty much everything. So that's where I think I started advising a few companies. Finaccel was one of them. Honestly, I give the credit to the Finaccel founder for finding me. It's not that I found Finaccel. He found me. He was impressed by the products I had built and asked me to be initially actually a co-founder. And then because I couldn't move from Singapore at that point, I became an advisor. And then eventually a year later, I joined as a chief product officer. Learned a lot. I was only there for a year. It was a bit of a shock for me as well, quite frankly, because I went from focusing very much on UI and web and app to then also automating processes, because a fintech company is very different from a travel meta search company. But again, learned a lot, built great products over there as well. And I really started, and when I saw that company grow, I realized that I was getting a good knack at solving really good problems. So context over here, 2015, the idea was to build a data-based credit scoring app that would then give credit to Indonesians, young Indonesians, hundreds of millions of young Indonesians who a bank would not give a credit card to, right? Partly because the credit scoring, a credit bureau was not very well established, and partly also because the cost of giving a credit card was quite high. But tech was the answer, and I was like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. Youngsters had just started spending a lot of time on social media, and the digital footprint was growing, and we believe we could build something to decide whether someone's credit worthy or not and give them instant access to capital without ever setting foot in a bank. So when that happened, it gave me more confidence, and I started advising a few more companies. They did well. And I think that's when I started also investing in some startups. And when you're putting your money on something versus putting your time, and especially if you're not like loaded with money in the first place, that really makes you assess whether you're choosing the right problem or not. And how much do you really believe in a problem versus just sounds cool, right? So I think that's essentially what has happened over time. Sorry for going on a long journey on this question, but one thing I've learned is choose the right problem. It has to be a big problem. With every problem from Wego to Finaccel, then Homage, and then now Locofy, my goal has been to choose a bigger problem, more audacious problem, a real problem rather than a tech-made problem. A lot of techies have built things that just don't matter. They are not solving a real problem, and they're just very good at selling a problem, and then people invest into it, and then it just 2-3 years later it dies because it was never a problem in the first place. So for me, it's very much about choosing a problem that is a real problem, where you don't have to argue with someone, or you don't have to convince someone that, hey, this is a problem. And that's essentially what I would say is what will stay consistent for the rest of my career as well, post Locofy, with Locofy, to solve problems where you don't need a salesperson to convince someone it's a problem, where the solution itself will decide whether you win or not. And in the case of Locofy, I've never till date called up a customer, an investor, or an employee that has joined us to say, hey, this is a problem. The moment we say convert your designs into code, everyone gets it in that 1 second. So that's my only, or at least that's how I've made my decisions, to choose a bigger, audacious problem where the solution is not that easy and only a few people can do it. And I believe I'm one of the people who can actually do it.
While you're mentioning all this, you seem to have a deep sense of understanding of what your unique skill set is, and what you're uniquely good at, what you're uniquely looking for. You're not looking for $1 billion or over. What would you say? And for founders at home,
No,
how would
I
you
never said
say?
I'm not looking for $1 billion or over, man.
I think I missaid.
No. No. So what I mean is like 0 to 1 is a term used in venture capital and in startups that says from going from nothing to something, and then taking it to a stage where at least it's matter of scale and economies of scale, but it's not about whether you've chosen the right problem and you have the right team. So I'm not the guy you put in a 5,000 people company and unless I built that company. Right. So for me, it's not about 1 billion. I would not say no to building 100 billion, 2 trillion company. It's just that in my 20s, I realized I was not the kind of a guy who can make myself successful in a big company, because it's not just about skills it's also about a lot more, right? Building consensus, getting yourself known, sometimes politics as well, whatever people might want to call it. But for me, I realized that pretty early. I think now at this stage in my career, I could potentially go anywhere. But as a youngster, I was just like, I cannot play that game in a big company.
And how do you think like people when they're trying to, because you said you're really skilled in product, you realize that. What was the moment when you realized, and how do you recommend other people figure out like, oh, what are they uniquely gifted at?
That's a tough one to answer, man. I mean, I realized it when, okay, so I'll be very, very candid. In university, I didn't pay attention to to anything, quite frankly. If you were to talk to my university friends, none of them saw me as like someone that they would look up to or someone they were scared of as a competitor, because I was not going for classes and my grades were not that good. Didn't mean that I was not learning, but in a very conventional, structured sort of a thing, I was not competing against my friends and going for the A grades. I was doing internships and I was building things by myself, which back then was not a cool thing. Trust me, in 2008 and 9, you were a guy with a mobile phone and walking around saying, I'm building something. People look at you and like, what is going on in your mind, man? Like, really. So for me, I think I really understood that I can build something when I was on an exchange program and we were building something, and I started finding issues in the user experience, and some of the really, really good sort of team members were like, holy shit, man, like you're really good at this. How did you figure that out? And I was like, I don't know. I'm just very logical and I can figure out, I can visualize things even if they're not in front of my eyes. And from that, I came back to Singapore after my exchange program. And when I started working with Microsoft, I think is the first time I realized I can build things and there are certain problems that excite me. I was still a student then. And then when I graduated and built my first taxi sharing app, I think that's when I realized, not that it was barely a company. I registered a company where it like failed. Not that the company did well, but I basically went from saying, hey, this seems to be a big problem. I think I can build it. This is how I would build it. I designed it. I got an engineer to work with me. I didn't like his work, so I just coded it myself. I went to an iTunes University course back then, I think it was Objective-C, sorry. So I learned how to do Objective-C for iOS, built it within a few days, launched it on the App Store, figured out how distribution works, figured out that some things are not working, figured out a revenue model as well. Started getting into like press releases and stuff like that very, very early without any resources. It was all my money. And it was not that I was getting paid quite a bit, right? Like it's like 4-5K a month was my starting salary, and 2K out of that was going into my own company. And I started getting users and I started getting acquisition offers, which I very stupidly rejected back then. But my point is, I realized that it is not just that you're building something and that it gets everyone interested. The kind of people who were reaching out to me, who are now, by the way, like billionaires, some of them have built something in that space. I started realizing that, you know what, I have a knack for it. My instincts are right. I am choosing a good problem and I'm backing myself and I'm not letting excuses come in my way. A lot of people, like I'm sure you have friends, I have friends and colleagues and who say that, oh, you know what, there is this thing I've always wanted to do. I wanted to build this. Why are you not doing it? Because, life comes in the way, or I didn't have an engineer with me, or I don't know if I have the time, or you know what, I have the time, but I'm trying to look for a co-founder. I didn't wait for any of that. I just went for it straight away. And I built it. It failed. Was probably one of the best decisions of my life still. I would still do it again. So for me, I think that's when I started realizing product management is something that requires you to understand engineering. And of course, I was writing code and I'm still very logical. Even till date, I haven't written code now for the last 10 years. I can argue and debate with a VP of engineering, a CTO, because at the end of the day, my brain thinks like pseudocode. I may not know what the latest syntaxes are, but I think in pseudocode. And I also think, by the way, people like me have a big opportunity to come back with prompt engineering now, because that's essentially what it is. If you can break down a problem into the right context and you can do pseudocode, you can actually get results. So anyway, so coming back, right? So that's where I started realizing that I'm not just a good engineer, but I had design, an eye for design, which probably comes from my mother because she's an arts teacher. And generally, generally people think that if you're on the artist side or on the logical side, right, like you're either good at maths or you're towards the art side. But I grew up working with my father at his shop, doing, numbers and business like this. And I am in Singapore because I was a damn good maths student. Like I was to the point that I would argue with my teachers, and I was like almost arrogant that no one can be better at maths than me. So I think that's where I started realizing that all the things in my past had gotten me to a stage where I can understand a business opportunity. I can understand the user side with some EQ and like designs and user experience, even though user experience was not even a term back then. And I can write code. So I essentially had everything I needed to be a builder. And that's what I realized was product management. And my goal was to become a product manager by the age of 30. But by the age of 29, I was already the chief product officer in a startup.
Wow.
So it just became one of those things where I was like, hey, product management is not about where you did your MBA. It is really about the impact you have delivered with tech. And I was able to do that in small iterations. And with every iteration, as I got more confidence, just like a machine learning model, it just gave me more confidence, and my instincts and my gut got stronger. And that's where it eventually got to a point where I was like, I'll now build my own company. I don't need to report to anyone.
Go back to the Locofy strategy, because I found it interesting, because it's been about like 8 months since your most recent one of your interviews, and in the interviews you mentioned that when you launched your Locofy, you didn't really market it on product launch initially for about 6 to 8 months. You really focused on community building. You focused on getting early feedback. What do you think? What other strategies did you implement for your early that you think benefited a lot? And also, would you make any adjustments in hindsight, because now it's 8 months afterwards?
Yeah, I think the decision to build and not market upfront was quite. We were very clear about this, man. Like, this is the first time we are solving a problem where we are the customers, right? Like, when I was solving for travel, yeah, sure, I traveled like 28 countries in those 4 years of working in travel, and I learned a lot. But and that did help me a lot. But I didn't understand travel very well. I understood travel because of my job. Then when I went to fintech, I had no idea about credit, lending, all of these things I learned on the job. Same with Homage, which is a healthcare, elderly caregiving marketplace, right? Locofy is the first time where I was like, I don't need to interview anyone on this, sorry. Because I've been building products now for 10 years. We've built a lot of great products, not just products, but great products. And we were often in a position where we would choose the tools to be more productive, and others would follow. Others in the community and others in our networks, and sometimes investors who would invest in our company would ask us, and then make sure the other companies in their portfolio would also be using those same products and platforms. We were the early adopters of things like material designs, progressive web apps, AMP, Polymer, you name it. Like, we were always the early adopters, and we would nail it every time. It was the same team always. And I think that's where we were very clear that when we build a developer tool, it is really not about how much noise you can create. We knew we can create noise, but it would have to be at a good time. It would have to be at the right time, because developers are some of the toughest people to please, right? But the thing about developers and designers is this: if you think about word of mouth, every startup and every company and every service product tries to go big on word of mouth, but not everything catches the attention of their end user to the point that we talk about it to other people. Like a product like this, I like it, I'm not going to talk to anyone about it. So it doesn't have that sort of multiplier effect, right? But with developers, if you give them a tool which convinces them or proves to them that it saves their time, they're going to tell every engineer in their network about it. And that's why developer tools are not necessarily sold by salespeople in the early days. Or you won't see Facebook ads and Google ads for developer tools in the early days. The world's best developer tools or design tools, whether it's Figma, GitHub, New Relic, Postman, the list is quite huge actually, Amplitude, Mixpanel, right? Like Firebase. They grew because of word of mouth, because they first proved to a smaller group of people, early adopters, that it helps them, and then just let the word of mouth take over. And when you start seeing that word of mouth getting to a point where your users are saying, hey, this is really good, and they start posting it on LinkedIn and social media, which happens with developers and designers a lot, that's the right time to start actually looking at marketing. So for us, the goal was always clear. We build, we keep it restricted to a smaller group of people. We're not going to do closed beta, we'll do open beta still, because we shouldn't stop anyone from trying it if they genuinely are early adopters and they want to give us feedback. But let's not focus too much on launching on product hunt and doing marketing campaigns and stuff like that too early. And if the product has legs, we won't ever have to worry about marketing. However, if the product is nonsense or it's garbage or even substandard, then no amount of marketing can fix.
It kind of reminds me because while I was interviewing Natu was also mentioning he really focused on building a community, and it was just word of mouth that started the initial just growth. And he also mentioned in another podcast that engineers are the hardest to please. So it seems something you're very vehement about. What would you say when you hire engineers and hire other people, other parts? How do you go about building a great team culture? Because that's an important part of product building.
Yeah, it depends on what people define as culture. For us, the culture is very, very clear. Everyone who's worked with me knows, and with my co-founder knows that if you want to build groundbreaking technologies, you will love working with us. But if you're expecting culture, as in how much time we spend with each other and perks and like work-life balance, sorry, we're not those people. We're just not those people. We see this as a performance sport, right? Like if I saw this post recently, where when you are playing in the NBA, no one ever questions how hard you'll have to work. But when you're somehow building a company, there's so much chatter around hey, we should have yoga retreats and we should have this and that, right? We're not people like that. We like to work on the toughest problems, and we like to attract people who will work on that tough problem, knowing that they have to be really smart at it, otherwise they won't make it. And they also have to work hard at it, because startup building is not easy. So we have attracted people. Actually, not many people that apply for a job have been hired in Locofy. It's mostly people who were recommended by someone in Locofy who would tell you the hard truth that, look, our work-life balance is more of a work-life integration, because we are very flexible with people if they want to go on Monday morning and do something that is important to them. But what we're not flexible with is if you're launching something on Friday, it is on Friday. Now, whether you're happily holidaying in, I don't know, man, Japan, and you can still make it work, or you're at home behind your laptop for 18 hours a day and you still cannot make it work, we will choose the first. We always go with solving a tough problem aggressively, and we have a timeline for it, and we have a minimum sort of requirement for quality. If you cannot make it, then it doesn't matter how nice a person you are and how many hours you've been working on it and how hard you work, you will not make it in Locofy. At least, in the early stages where it's very hard to hide. So for us, culture is about finding people who truly are looking to push their limits to the excellence, who obviously know how to do that, but they also want to always keep on solving a tougher problem, and then supporting them. Once we find these people, they know very well Sohaib and I will support them forever, not just at Locofy, right? So Sohaib, for example, was one of these people I hired. He was the first engineer I hired 10 years ago, and now he's my co-founder. We worked in 3 companies together, and he has had some times when he's like, I don't know why I work with you, and I'm like, I don't know why I work with you as well, but we would rather not work with anyone else, because every time we join hands, we produce good results. All the products we built are out there for people to be seen, and we don't want to stop as well. We are both like, look, we've built one of the world's first progressive web apps. Let's not sit and chill out because we've figured it out. Let's go and look for the next big thing, basically, in tech. Let's always be an early adopter to the new, really useful technologies coming out, learn and be on top of things. So once we find people like that, we promote them, we take care of them, even their personal lives, we try and help them as much as we can. And we have a very clear direction to them. If you make it past the first 3 to 6 months in Locofy, which is very, very hard, after that, you will never have to worry about a job in your life. Wherever Sohaib and I go, whatever we are doing at Locofy, you will be promoted and you can choose what role you want to do, provided you don't get complacent again. Or if Sohaib and I move on, let's say Locofy doesn't do well, right? And we start another company, or we go into a job, you will be taken care of. We will take you with us. Because it's very hard to find people who actually, first of all, give a shit. And secondly, They give a shit, but they know how to actually have like deliver impact. When you find them, or sometimes you find people who can do that, but they don't necessarily match with you on the chemistry side. If you've gone through so many hurdles to get to a place where you feel that we can work together, chemistry is great, and we deliver really like impactful things together, and we learn and we grow together, then people don't leave. That's why Sohaib and I started a company together, and we know the next time we do it, maybe 10 years down the line, some of our core team members will be our co-founders. That's the kind of culture we've built. It is really not about, I don't know if we have any perks at all. Like we meet once a month as a remote company. We have a good time when we meet each other, but it is more about the work we do and how we support them when they treat this company as if it's their own.
So it's like I mean, you mentioned like as a hiring mechanism, you have a very difficult mission, and then that kind of helps you hire, and then that's the entire team culture. It kind of reminds me like PayPal. You were saying like after 3 to 6 months, you're always going to be taken care of. It sounds like PayPal was very intense. And do you think that kind of is really necessary for like deep tech? Because you are kind of like very technology focused companies.
For sure, man. Just think about it, right? Like fundamentally, we are building a tool that other engineers can use to solve any problem in the world, whether they are building the next PayPal or Grab or Google or Facebook. Then our tool has to be so good that engineers in some of the best organizations in the world say, hey, you know what, this writes code better than me or as good as me, or 80% of what I would have done, but it's enough saving for me to go in and make some changes. You can't do that by just hiring people who don't know how to do it, right? You have to have built products in the past. Yeah. So if you haven't built products in the past, if you haven't written code to, let's say, solve a fintech problem or health tech problem, whatever it is, how are you going to build a tool that can solve any problem in the world for the best engineers of the world? You can't. So we are very clear about it. This is not a job where you can survive if you don't know what you're doing, and that kind of is an easy filter for us as well, because then we only bring in people who are passionate about web and apps and they've built products in the past, and they can go through some of the toughest technical challenges we throw at them before we hire them.
Adding on to that, how do you think you can like compete with like, because there's other companies that have like hard teams. What do you think is the moat you would have, or what's how do you go about winning your competitors who also have these hard driven teams, would you say?
Yeah, I look at the teams first, which we did. And look, the thing is, in a small market, you worry too much, but it's such a big market that honestly, I want to have competitors to kind of keep us a little bit competitive, right? Like not for the founders, my co-founder and I are super clear, and for some senior leaders, it's very easy to motivate them. But sometimes having a competitor gives you something that the rest of the team can latch on and move faster and be more competitive. How do we stay ahead of them is basically simple. We define what the core values for us are in terms of winning. It is really about delivering code quality that is as good as the best engineers in our team can deliver, and do it in the simplest way, and figure out storytelling better than anyone else. Rest of it, we just leave it to how things will happen, because we looked at some of the competitors and the teams, and I've met some of them as well, and without getting into it too much, we looked at their team and said, you know what, even though some of them have 3 year or 4 years advantage of starting earlier, we think we can beat that team. So it really was about the team and less about like, hey, they have a 4-year advantage or a 2-year advantage. And another thing that we tested was this: if any of them had done an excellent job at solving this problem, then in 2021, I would not be starting Locofy. I would be using their tool to build whatever I was building. So if I'm known, or at least I know that I try some of the earliest products and figure them out before others do. And if I had never heard of their tool itself, that in itself for me was the first sort of validation that even though some companies were already building this, they haven't done a good enough job. Then we assessed them, we didn't like it, and we were like, this is terrible code, we will never use this code. And the third one was, can we do better? And we looked at the teams and we said, yeah, you know what, I would take that bet. I'm not saying I will beat their teams, or in the early days, yes, when you're starting a company, you think about competitors, but very quickly we made the decision and said we would take that bet. And then we just realized that everyone has their own way of doing things. Just because someone else is doing something remotely similar doesn't mean we have to obsess over it, because it's such a large market that they should do things their way, and we should have respect for what they're doing well. But we should also not be following their playbook. I would rather be building and moving so fast that forces my competitors to follow my playbook rather than me playing catch up with them. And that's what we're focused on. What is the way we see Locofy helping us before anyone else? So a simple thing is, I tell Sohaib, would you use this to build the products you built in the past? And if he says no, then we're not shipping it. And then let's stop kidding ourselves. Then we're not building anything useful. But if you're launching something today that would have helped us build that feature at Wego 8 years ago, or at Finaccel 6 years ago, or at Homage a few years ago, then you know what? Then we're on the right track. So we have that sort of test internally of not delivering anything that we wouldn't use ourselves. So we dog food it. We also always assess, could we have built that editor's choice app with this product? Could we have built that progressive web app with 2 engineers in half the time with this product? If not, then you know what? Let's not raise money. Let's shut the company down. So I think that's how we think about winning, rather than thinking about like beating a competitor or doing feature parity. All of that doesn't make sense. Yeah.
So you have a very simple decision-making process to your goals and trajectories. What are I'm curious, what are resources? Because you have mentors and advisors. What are people you look up to and you look for advice from, and also maybe books or other resources?
Yeah. Yeah, look, it is super important, and especially when you are a founder, I would say. So in my case, I was lucky to have good bosses, but I would also say, if you ask my bosses, especially the first one from Wego, who ended up being an angel investor, he would say that he didn't really need to teach me much. He was just enabling me, because I always had the right ideas. He knew I would back them, and I would always show results. And that's what got me to go from being a product manager to chief product officer, right? But he was the right mentor in the sense that when I had to make non-technical decisions, he was always there to share. And he is, till date, he's one of the first people I call. But in the early stages, I would say, if you get a good boss, you really don't need too many mentors. Just get one more, right? It's not about how many mentors you have. It's more about where do you need help and what kind of support are you getting from your boss. If not, look for someone externally. And in some cases, it's better to have an external mentor, because you can't discuss everything about, with your boss, obviously. But I think when you start a company, then I would highly recommend getting mentors. And the more those mentors are actually ex-founders, the better. So I've seen, I've invested in a few startups as well. I've advised startups. And the one big issue that I see with some first-time entrepreneurs or first-time founders is they bring these big company execs as mentors. They're not going to teach them anything. In fact, if anything, it will be counterproductive, because what you need to do in the early stages is very different from what these people who are, again, it takes a lot to get to a VP position in a big company, right? But they won't give you the kind of advice that will help you succeed, because they haven't failed at the things that you will fail at. And the whole point of getting advisors and mentors is to get help on avoiding the biggest mistakes that can shut down your company. Whether it's a founder who says, hey, don't do this because my company died because of it, or a mentor who helps you make that tough decision where they don't give you the advice on what to do, but help you get to that decision faster. I think that's the whole point of having mentors. So I know you've interviewed Natu before, the founder of Lotifiles. He was very similar to us. He was building at the same era as us. We kind of knew about each other, and then now we are very supportive of each other, because we feel that, hey, some of the OGs of startups in Southeast Asia are now building their own. We should support each other. So Natu, for example, is one of those guys who I call up and say, hey, you're building Lotifiles 2 years before Locofy. A lot of the problems I'm facing today, you faced just recently. So tell me everything about it. I don't have a specific question where I need an answer, but you tell me everything about it, and I will try and identify what correlates to my business and what could be potential pain points that they faced that I could avoid. They don't give you the answers, but they at least help you understand certain stages that you may want to navigate better, right? When I was starting the company, I didn't know how to do fundraising, and I got my mentor, when I went to talk to him, he offered me the first check, and it just ended up like becoming a $1 million round over a weekend. But at that point, I got myself an advisor and I said, hey, I want you to be an advisor. And he's like, you don't need me as an advisor. I can be an investor. So I will anyway be helping you as a friend and as an investor. I was like, no, I need you as an advisor. So I want to give you more equity because I want to be able to call you up when I need to. If you're my investor, I will think twice before reaching out to you. But I need to not feel like, you know what, I may be stepping on his, like, you know, whatever, like crossing the boundaries. It's not his job to help me. When you're my advisor, I'm giving you equity. I will call you up at 2 a.m. at times without feeling sorry about it. It's not to say that I will abuse the time that I get from you. I only call my advisors once in 6 to 8 months. But when I do, it's a life-changing potential problem or a situation that I need your full focus on. And just knowing that you have someone on hot dial or message who can help you brings a lot of confidence to first-time founders or even like experienced founders. So I raise money from angels who are either building companies or have built companies from the early stages. And yeah, of course, 100%, man, you should have advisors and mentors, because there are certain situations where I was like, if I didn't have Nattu to help me with this one, or if I didn't have, Rajoshi, who's the founder of Hasura, to spend that 2 hours with me on her early days of Hasura, then I would have never ever, accelerated or made it this far. 100%. When you're starting a company, you need it. When you're just, let's say, when you're not a founder, I think you should still get a mentor, but you don't need that many, because the kind of situations you'll be faced with, 90% of them, as long as you have a great relationship with your manager, I think you don't need an external mentor, quite frankly.
I mean, you already sort of answered this before the podcast. Actually, I was asking, like, why do some of the mentors give? I mean, personally as well, why do they give me time? And I would love to go more in depth into your explanation and why mentors advise without investors, just mentors.
Yeah. Whether it's advisors, mentors, it's about time, right? You're giving someone time, and if you have something that people find valuable, it means you value your time. You want advice from people who don't have time to give, right? Like, because they're obviously busy and they have a lot of people who are looking for advice. So why would someone say yes to advise or mentor someone, whether it's for equity or just to help someone out? Doesn't matter. It's essentially them making an hour or two for you. I think, look, this is just my opinion on this, but I think they do it when they see something in the other person that triggers something in the memory and say, hey, you know what? This person, I can see the trajectory. It reminds me of myself, right? And I wish I had a mentor back then, or I had a mentor and he helped me, so I'm going to pass this on as well, right? Now, it doesn't mean I'll make time for everyone, because a lot of people do reach out for advice and mentorship, and I do it over chat and I say, sorry, I can't meet you for that coffee. And it could be because either I see something in their profile or what they're doing is not really exciting, or I feel like I don't want to give generic advice that you can Google today and find it. ChatGPT will do it much faster and better than me. But if you're building something, or if you are going through this sort of tough situation in your life, and I can see that you have shown in some ways the ability to come out winning, then I might actually end up learning something from you as well. So a big part of mentorship or advisory is to do with seeing some parallels where you trigger something in the other person that is very personal. And sometimes selfishly, mentorship and advisory is just a way of learning from other people who you think are smarter than you. So I became an advisor to a few companies. The first company I started advising was Finaccel before I eventually joined them. And when he offered me advisory equity, I was like, what? I didn't even need that. I was just going to learn from you. I was just going to be a sponge, offer you whatever help I could give
Wow.
you. But I was like, really? I would have just done it for free. And he was like, no. And this is, by the way, one of the best things I learned from him, to never take an advisor for granted. Not that I would have done it, but the way he did it to me when I was just a 26-year-old itself was like, you know what? He values my time. That's great. Yeah, I mean, I think that's essentially what it comes down to. I actually asked someone I really look up to on why he chose to invest in us, advisors, and he's like, very selfishly, I want to learn. I think I can help you a little bit, but in return, I can learn from you as well. And you will never, ever regret investing into learning. And sometimes at a certain age, the best way of learning is to just become part of someone else's journey where you can offer some help, but in return, you learn so much. I actually ended up learning how to fundraise from a founder I was advising. And I told him I should maybe give you some money just because I actually learned how to fundraise from you when I'm actually your advisor. I'm his product advisor, and I'm sure he has found a lot of help from me in the last 4 5 years. I went from his advisor to his investor. He's a company called Better Half. But I just observed how this guy would just go and fundraise. In a tough market where he wouldn't get a Series A, he raised an angel round of $8 million.
Wow, angel round. Wow.
Angel round. And I was like,
Wow.
I admire people like that who just do not give up. And I was like, you know what? You know what, man? Like all the things I've told myself, fundraising is difficult and doing this is difficult, is just me creating a block for myself. If you have the mentality of just going and doing it and learning fast, nothing is impossible. Quite frankly, nothing is impossible. Fundraising, definitely not.
And I never thought of it. And you're advising to get advice. That
Yeah,
I never thought
of
of that. Wow,
course.
wow.
And now that person is an
No.
investor in my company because he's like, honey, I need to invest in your company. I was like, dude, for you, anything. No, no cap, nothing. You give me $1, I'll take it because secretly I've been able to do a lot of these things because I've just been learning from you. And that's the best part of this sort of a relationship where no one feels used. Both people are learning and growing at the same time.
Yeah. So I'm so thankful for your time. And this is the last question I ask all my guests. If you could go back in time to when you were 17 years old, what would you tell yourself?
Yeah, so um, okay. I think people obviously have a lot of regrets when they are like mid 30s and 40s that they may not necessarily want to admit to. And I'm no different. But I wouldn't go back and tell myself anything. Simple reason for that is I wouldn't want to change how my life has ended up being in any way. Like back when I was 17, I had some, I think, I was a teenager, so emotionally a bit of a mess. B, I grew up in a very humble sort of situation, and like anyone who doesn't come from a financially, like strong backing, one of the biggest things was always like thinking about like why did life turn out to be like this for ourselves, right? Like, and look at others and feel sorry for yourself as well, right? If I could go back and tell myself at 17, hey, dude, just keep going. I already did that. If I could go back and tell myself, don't worry so much, things will turn out to be okay, then I don't think I would be where I am if I didn't worry. If I could go back and tell myself, hey, you have too much fire in you, don't like calm down a bit, life will turn out to be okay, then I fear I would have taken a safe job. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, but they are the reason that I'm here, and I have no regrets that way in how life has turned out to be. There are a few things that I could have done on a personal level that, but I still tell myself, don't get so angry, and it still doesn't do anything. So I don't think if I could go back to a 17-year-old me and tell myself that, it would make a difference, because I tell myself even today when I'm more in control and some things are just the way they are. So I think I wouldn't change a thing because life turns out the way it has to turn out. Struggles define who you are. They make you make decisions. They make you a certain risk appetite. And I ended up being that person who's like, I will never stop learning because that's the only weapon I have. And I'm just going to take risks, and I'm not going to get comfortable in my job. And today I know tons of people who are just scared of uncertainty, scared of chaos, scared of like, I don't know what will happen next, scared of like AI will take my job, scared of I'm not learning and someone else is doing this. I don't have that. And I'm lucky in many ways that I went through the struggles that I went through, because they defined who I am, and I wouldn't go back and change a thing, and especially not get in my own mind and change the way I thought, because that's what brings me to where I am today. Yeah, so I wouldn't change a thing, man. I wouldn't go back. I wouldn't want to go back and tell myself anything.
Yeah, that's a great way of ending the podcast. I'm so thankful for your time, Honey. I'm so appreciative. Ladies and gentlemen,
No,
this
thanks
is
a lot,
Honey.
man. Thanks a lot for having
Okay.
me, man. We'll see you in Singapore soon, hopefully.